It took 1 week for Cristiano Ronaldo to go from finished to becoming the problem FIFA may have accidentally created for everybody else. Because this was supposed to be the moment the story finally turned against him. Portugal had just come through one of the ugliest Ronaldo performances anyone could remember. No goal, no impact, no spark. Against the Democratic Republic of Congo, he looked slow, frustrated, disconnected, and for the first time in a World Cup, there was a very real sense that the tournament had moved on without him. The reaction was brutal, not criticism, brutal. Ghost, statue, passenger, retire. At 41 years old, with 10 straight major tournament games without a goal, the conversation changed from, can Ronaldo still carry Portugal, to, why is he even still starting? And once that switch flips, it usually never flips back. But that is exactly why this became dangerous. Because if there is one thing football has learned over and over again, it is that writing off Cristiano Ronaldo is never just analysis. It is a gamble, a reckless one. The kind that looks smart for a few days, right up until he decides to make it personal, and this time it became personal fast. Ronaldo later admitted the noise around him had become so loud that it felt like people were treating him as if he had already retired. Not declining, not struggling, retired. Like the funeral had already happened and somebody forgot to tell him. And if you know anything about the way Ronaldo operates, you know that is exactly the kind of insult that does not calm him down. It activates him. So now the question wasn't whether Portugal had a Ronaldo problem. The question was whether FIFA, the media, the pundits, the fans, and maybe even Portugal's own doubters had just done the one thing you should never do to a player built almost entirely on obsession, ego, and vengeance. They woke him up. And then came Houston. Portugal against Uzbekistan should have been a routine group stage game, a comfortable win, a chance to settle nerves, a match people would forget by the next morning. Instead, it turned into something much bigger than that because Ronaldo did not just score. He made a statement, 2 goals in a 5-0 demolition. One of them a reminder of the movement people said he no longer had, the other a reminder of the finishing instinct people keep trying to bury before it's actually dead. And then, just in case anyone missed the point, he ran straight to the camera and screamed, "I'm back." Not "we're back," not "Portugal are back." I'm back. That matters, because this was never just about 3 points. This was a public answer to a public humiliation, a direct response to a week of ridicule. And in one moment, the mood around Portugal changed from concern to chaos, because now nobody knew what they were actually watching. Was the Congo performance proof that Ronaldo is finally at the end? Or was it the mistake that triggered the exact reaction Portugal needed? Was Uzbekistan just weak opposition? Or had the entire tournament narrative been flipped by one furious 90-minute response from the most stubborn superstar football has ever produced? And that is where the story gets messy, because the comeback itself was dramatic. The context around it was even bigger. With those 2 goals, Ronaldo didn't just silence people for a night. He forced himself back into the center of the World Cup. He became the first player in football history to score in 6 different World Cups. 6, 2006 to 2026, 20 years of refusing to leave the stage. He became the oldest outfield player ever to start a World Cup match. He passed Eusébio to become Portugal's all-time leading World Cup scorer. In other words, the same player people were calling a liability a few days earlier had suddenly turned the tournament into another Cristiano Ronaldo history lesson. And that's the trap. Because when Ronaldo starts breaking records, the football conversation usually stops being rational. It becomes emotional, polarized, defensive, tribal. One side sees greatness, the other sees PR. One side sees longevity no one else can match. The other sees a superstar being force-fed minutes because of his name. And the more records he piles up, the harder it becomes to separate what is actually helping Portugal from what simply looks iconic in a highlight package. That is the uncomfortable part of this whole thing. Ronaldo's resurrection against Uzbekistan was real. The numbers are real. The moment was real. But the debate did not disappear. it got worse. Because critics immediately pointed to the obvious question, okay, but against who? Uzbekistan are not one of the tournament heavyweights. They are not France. They are not Argentina. They are not a knockout round defense designed to suffocate every touch. So if Ronaldo scores twice against a lower-ranked side, what exactly does that prove? That he's still lethal in the box? Probably. That he should still be the focal point when Portugal face elite teams? That's where the argument starts all over again. And Portugal can't escape that argument because the problem with Ronaldo has never been just goals. It is everything around the goals. His supporters will tell you the same thing they've always said. If you give him service, if you put runners around him, if you keep him close to the box, he can still decide matches in one touch. They'll point to the movement, the timing, the finishing, the mentality, the sheer terror he still creates in defenders who know what he can do if they switch off for half a second. And against Uzbekistan, that case looked convincing, very convincing. But the skeptics are not imagining things either. They look at the same game and see a striker who still depends heavily on the team being built around him. A player whose build-up contribution is not what it used to be. A player who does not press like the younger forwards around him. A player who can disappear if Portugal lose control of midfield and stop delivering chances into dangerous areas. And compared to the version of Lionel Messi still dictating games, or the chaos Mbappe can create by himself, or the relentless power of Haaland in front of goal, Ronaldo's role feels narrower now, more specialized, more fragile. Which means every big Ronaldo performance creates two completely opposite conclusions at the same time. He's back, or he's being protected by the right opponent at the right moment. And if you think that contradiction helps Portugal, it doesn't. It puts even more pressure on them. Because now Roberto Martínez has a bigger problem than before the Uzbekistan game. Before, the issue was whether Ronaldo should still be trusted. Now the issue is much more complicated. What do you do if he's still capable of these explosions but only under certain conditions? Do you build around the possibility of a Ronaldo masterclass and risk becoming predictable against stronger teams? Or do you move away from him and risk benching the one player in your squad who just reminded the entire world that he can still turn humiliation into headlines in a matter of days? That is the decision hanging over Portugal now, and it is not a small one. Because Portugal are not a team built around nostalgia. This is one of the most talented squads in the tournament. There is pace, control, creativity, runners everywhere, goals from midfield, technical quality all over the pitch. In theory, this should be the perfect environment to transition beyond Ronaldo, to use him carefully, to protect the team from becoming emotionally dependent on one man. But theory and reality are not the same thing when that one man is Cristiano Ronaldo and he has just screamed, "I'm back," into a camera after breaking another World Cup record. Now every decision becomes political. If Martínez starts him against stronger opposition and Ronaldo struggles, the criticism returns immediately. Why are Portugal forcing this? Why are they slowing themselves down for a 41-year-old? Why is one of the most talented squads in the world still orbiting a player who is no longer in his physical prime? But if Martínez benches him or reduces his role and Portugal drop points, then the other storm arrives. Why would you sideline the greatest goal scorer of all time right after he rescued his World Cup? Why would you kill momentum? Why would you poke the one personality in football who seems to turn disrespect into fuel? That's why this performance didn't calm the situation. It destabilized it. It reopened every argument at once. And it did something else too. It exposed how quickly football turns on legends when the decline becomes visible. Because the week before Uzbekistan wasn't just criticism of Ronaldo's form, it was a kind of public stripping away of status. As if the sport had been waiting for permission to finally say it. He's done. He's holding Portugal back. He's embarrassing himself. That's what made the response so dramatic. Ronaldo wasn't reacting to one bad game. He was reacting to the possibility that the football world had decided his ending for him. That matters because Ronaldo has spent almost his entire career at war with endings. He doesn't accept them. He delays them. He negotiates with them. He outruns them. and when he can't outrun them, he tries to outscore them. That is basically the entire late-stage Ronaldo project. A battle against time being fought in public, at the highest level of the sport, with the entire world watching every touch and every sprint to see whether the myth still has life in it. Most players are allowed to age in private. Ronaldo is doing it under a microscope at the World Cup, while being compared not just to current stars but to his own impossible past. And that is why a game like Uzbekistan becomes explosive, because it feeds both the myth and the denial. It gives supporters proof that he still belongs. It gives critics a fresh excuse to say the sample is misleading. It gives Portugal hope. It gives Portugal a headache. It gives Ronaldo oxygen. And once Ronaldo gets oxygen, he tends to take over the room. Even the praise after the game added to the tension. Opposing coach Fabio Cannavaro, someone who understands elite mentality better than most, praised Ronaldo's hunger and his instinct in front of goal. Teammates rallied around him. Supporters flooded social media with the usual never doubt him victory lap. The same people who had been told all week that Ronaldo was a burden were now watching one of the oldest outfield players in World Cup history steal the spotlight again. But praise creates its own problem, because every compliment raises the expectation for the next match. Every emotional reaction drags the story further away from tactics and closer to mythology. And once you enter Ronaldo mythology, logic gets very thin very quickly. Suddenly it's not enough for him to have bounced back. Now people want to know whether this is the beginning of one last ridiculous run. Can he score against a top defense? Can he drag Portugal deep into the tournament? Can he turn a week of mockery into another all-time Ronaldo chapter? And that is where FIFA may have made its biggest mistake of all. Not because FIFA literally criticized him, not because they planned any of this, but because the tournament environment allowed the pressure, the doubt, the noise, and the humiliation to build around the one player in the sport who has spent 2 decades converting disrespect into production. You can almost see the cycle. Poor game, pile on, questions about retirement, questions about relevance, questions about whether the modern game has left him behind. Then one opening, one weaker opponent, one chance to reassert himself, one moment in front of the camera. And suddenly the tournament has a Ronaldo subplot again, whether it wanted one or not. That is what makes him exhausting. That is what makes him dangerous. You think the conversation is finally about the team, and then somehow it becomes about him all over again. Now, to be fair, the strongest counterargument is obvious. Maybe this is exactly what it looks like. One brilliant response against weaker opposition, nothing more. Maybe Portugal can still use Ronaldo in specific moments without pretending he's the center of the universe. Maybe the Uzbekistan game was catharsis, not transformation. Maybe the criticism after Congo was still valid, and the only mistake was overreacting to one bad performance from an aging legend. That is possible. It's more than possible. It might be true. But even if that's true, the controversy doesn't go away, because the underlying problem remains unresolved. Nobody knows what Portugal's best version actually is when the pressure spikes. Nobody knows if Ronaldo can still produce like this against the teams that matter most. Nobody knows whether Portugal are managing the end of an era or accidentally extending it because the man at the center of it refuses to cooperate with reality. And most importantly, nobody knows what happens if Ronaldo scores again. Because one big game is a response, 2 big games is momentum, 3 big games and the entire tournament changes shape. That's the real danger here. Not that Ronaldo scored twice against Uzbekistan. It's that he reminded everybody what happens when you give him a target. He reminded Portugal that no matter how modern, talented, and balanced this squad is supposed to be, the gravitational pull of Cristiano Ronaldo can still bend everything around it. He reminded critics that the line between finished and finished talking is very thin when the player involved is this obsessive. And he reminded the tournament itself that the biggest stars don't always fade quietly. Sometimes they get cornered, mocked, pushed to the edge, and then do the one thing that makes the whole situation even harder to control. They come back just enough to make everyone doubt their own judgment. So now the story is no longer about whether Ronaldo was bad against Congo. That part is already old. The story is whether that humiliation created the exact version of Ronaldo nobody wanted to deal with, the vindictive version, the scoreboard version, the version that treats every insult like a contract. And if that version is alive even briefly, then Portugal are not just carrying a 41-year-old legend through one last World Cup. They're carrying a live wire, a player who can still rescue a game, hijack a narrative, divide an entire fan base, and force every tactical decision to run through his ego, his record chase, and his need to prove the world wrong one more time. That is why this doesn't feel settled, not even close. Ronaldo's critics have not been silenced. They've